This is a training about the basics of GPA, and we are going to show you in our train environment with fake student and staff data how to look at those GPA calculations and which places they impact here around PowerSchool. And so feel free at any point to take yourself off mute, ask questions. We have several team members on the call. And if you're more comfortable, you can put a question in the chat. We have several team members monitoring the chat, and we can definitely pause for questions. Again, we're going to plan for about an hour, give or take, but we have some content we want to get through. But I think the most valuable use of these types of trainings, all of our trainings, in fact, are the questions you ask. And I'm sure if you have a question that someone else here has a similar or the same question. The first thing I want to address here is that we're in a train environment, it's wide open. And again, I've talked about how the student data is fake. That's important as well. But I also want to say that I have my security allowance within the train environment is that I can see everything. You may have limited access in your own district. You are not, I know, in the train environment with us today. You're in your own district, hopefully looking around, hopefully not. Sometimes we encourage you to play around. If you were in our train environment, we'd say, oh, you can, look at things, change things. But when you're in your own environment, we do not encourage you to do so, but please feel free to navigate around your screens within your own environment. If you have the ability to have two screens today, and look at the same pages in your district that we're looking at in ours. But the reason I say all that is that I have district office level access as well as access to all of these buildings, whereas you as a user might have access to only one building or a couple buildings, and you might not have district office access. Before I go on, I'm just going to point one thing out that, again, I referenced that I sent you this morning in your reminder. If you look at our PowerSchool help menu, there you will find all of our documentation. I'm not going to go through how to find that today, since I know a lot of you are return users, and again, we have a video out there that shows how to do that. All right, so starting here with, I did send an agenda, and in some of the places I gave you breadcrumbs on pages we're going to go to. So the first thing I want to show you about GPA, I think arguably where it all starts is the GPA calculations. So I'm going to go to the district management. Again, I'm in district office. I'm going to start with district management, and I'm going to go up to the academics menu, and I'm going to go to GPA calculation methods. If you, again, you may have limited security access. So if you've never seen the screen, this lists out every GPA calculation in the history of PowerSchool for your district. Anything that's been used in the past is being used in the present. Just a couple of cautions on this page. We would never encourage you to come through and change these names or edit these calculations without very careful consideration. And what I mean is that would be talking to probably several people within your district about GPA and how these are calculated. Typically, if you're going to change how GPA is calculated, you would create a new GPA calculation. That might explain why in this environment we have so many. Maybe they were using some in the past that are no longer used. They've created new ones. But to go back and change GPA calculations, you are not changing past data, but you may be impacting something that someone in your district is maybe using right now for a calculation. And so that's why we would discourage that. The other thing I mentioned is renaming. So I will tell you that, again, I'm in this train environment. I came through here and I did a little toying around a couple weeks back, and I changed the names of some of these calculations. You don't want to do that unless you're very familiar with everywhere in PowerSchool that is utilizing these GPA calculations, because what's going to happen is those calculations will no longer work if you rename the calculations here from this page. So that would be a great explanation for why we should limit who has access to this page at the district office. In fact, we don't want just anybody editing these calculations. So when we're on this page, I also once again want to reference, and this can be done anywhere in PowerSchool, but I also want to reference the help menu once again. If I click on System Help in Core PowerSchool, anywhere I am in PowerSchool, for example, here, then it's going to tell me, it's going to give me the help section of PowerSchool help for this particular page or the subject of this particular page. So I just wanted to point that out. If there are things you want to learn about regarding GPA, if I was on the GPA methods, I could go into PowerSchool help and it would tell me a lot about them. So I'm going to close out of there for now. There are effectively three different types of GPA calculations. There are cumulative, which look at historical grades. There are current type GPAs that look at the gradebook, the current what's in the gradebook, and projected GPA, which I will say from a personal standpoint, I rarely see used. I don't know if someone else on the call wants to chime in on that, but I don't see projected used a whole lot. I think we have at least one district using it, but it's not that common. And my understanding of projected GPA is that it's historical grades plus projected grades that are in the grade book. Would that be an accurate way of stating it? Other people on the team?
Yeah, the few that do use it, typically you'll see that maybe around the fourth quarter or the third quarter, just to kind of see where people are on track. But you are right, it is a combination of the historical grades and whatever that current grading period is coming from the grade book.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Mhm.
So additionally, when we're talking about types of GPAs, you've heard the terms weighted and unweighted GPA. And so you will see in our own train database here, we have high school cumulative unweighted. In the eyes of PowerSchool, or from the definition of PowerSchool, weighted means that it's taking the amount of potential credit into account for weighted, as opposed to being a simple GPA. So every out of the box PowerSchool, your system comes with a simple calculation. I don't want to dig too deep in this power hour on how exactly a GPA is calculated and what all of this means. You may have questions, and if so, I encourage you to ask. But I wasn't planning on digging into all of these different calculations and what exactly everything means. But in a nutshell, a simple GPA is the total GPA points divided by the number of classes that a student is taking, whereas a weighted GPA takes potential credit into account. And that's where we get this piece here. Now, we know that some of our districts utilize the naming convention of weighted versus unweighted in a slightly different way than maybe out of the box PowerSchool presents. And that's where you get, in this box here, in this train box here, they're calling weighted cumulative GPA versus unweighted the one that takes weighting or AP weights into consideration, I will say. And so you can see weighted cumulative GPA that's used to determine their class rank. And this is, again, just one example setup. This may not be what you have. This is just giving examples of what we have in our train box. So the weighted cumulative GPA is using the rank here, is what they use for the class rank here, whereas what they call unweighted here is ignoring those AP weights. So some GPAs have added value, and in this school's case, they have added value on their AP classes, allegedly, apparently. So that's where you're seeing some of these differences in the GPA calculation. So there's a lot to unpack here. It goes pretty deep, and again, I know this is, I'm kind of putting a lot out there right now in general about GPAs, but does anybody have any questions so far? And it's okay if you do, and we'll try to address those as best as we can. And I'm going to go into these calculations, a couple of these, by the way, talk about them, the kind of parameters that we're going to set. But any general questions about differences in GPA calculation?
I am not seeing anything in the chat,
All right.
but feel free to take yourself off mute if you do have a question.
Let's go into one of the GPAs, because again, I think there's people on this call who've maybe not seen these screens before. And I think it's important to show you what is required for a GPA calculation. And every GPA, of course, has a method name. The description is optional, but as you can imagine, it's very useful, especially when there are staff changes and you have someone new coming in trying to make sense or determine the uses for each of these GPA calculations. It's really nice when there's a description left behind for that next person. So I would always encourage that description. So maybe what it's used for, um, what it does, that sort of thing. As much detail as you want to give here is great. The formula, so the GPA calculation formula. This is what I was referencing earlier that I'm not going to dig too deep in today, but you can kind of get an idea of the, you're seeing points. I think we all on the call know what, GPA points are. So the numeric value assigned to each letter that a student is earning in their final grade, right? We talked a little bit already about added value. So added value can be on a course. So AP classes are a good example, maybe CCP courses. I know that a few years ago, it was decided that any school that was weighting any courses would also have to weight CCP courses equivalently or equally. And so you might have GPA added value on some of those courses as well. Now you can use a different grade scale to accommodate for that as well, but some of you are simply adding points or point values on top of the grade points, the GPA points here for an added value. We talked about potential credit. So final grades should have potential credit, right? Your students are usually earning credit, but would always have potential credit on those final grades in order to calculate a GPA, unless again, you're using that simple GPA formula I referenced earlier, the simple total points divided by number of classes. But usually there's a potential credit value in there so that it's calculating, the difference between a course that's worth a full credit versus a course that's worth a quarter credit, like a PE class. It would make a difference in the calculation how much, quote unquote, not to reuse a term, but how much weight is put into that course would be determined by how much potential credit it has. All right, so that's just a little bit about the calculation here. Again, I didn't plan to dive too deep into that. I talked earlier about the 3 different calculation types. I referenced those when I was on the previous page, but I just wanted to point out where that's set on the GPA calculation here on this page. So you have a difference between your cumulative, which is looking at historical grades, your current GPA, which will look only at gradebook grades. So, and there is reasons to use that. So a lot of our districts are using a current GPA to determine where students are in the moment, how they're doing in the current term. And we talked about that projected GPA, right? So that combination of stored grades and the in what's in the grade book. And as Linda pointed out, especially for your probably late in the year seniors to determine maybe who is going to be ranked higher in the class or the valedictorian or that sort of thing. So you want to get a projected GPA on those students. Some GPAs have a grade scale set on them. So when that's the case, that this GPA will only utilize that particular grade scale. Now note that there's a grade scale set on every single one of your courses, either the default grade scale, which is usually the case, or you may have some kind of other grade scale set on your courses. But if you set a grade scale here on the GPA, this GPA will only utilize that grade scale regardless of what it says on the course. All right, getting into more specifics here. Some of this is used on GPAs and some of it's not. One thing that I'll almost always see on a GPA parameter is, or the, as it calls it, query options, is the terms. So you would want to designate which term or terms that a particular GPA is pulling from, so that, if, for example, you had potential credit on the quarter length terms, you wouldn't necessarily want that to calculate within a student's cumulative GPA. Therefore, this is where you would set which terms that are the cumulative GPA is actually looking at. So only the potential credit is utilized on the year one, the S1, and the S2. And I know some of our high schools aren't storing grades in the Y1, so that might be a non-factor for you. It may only be S1 and S2. But typically on a cumulative overall GPA, you wouldn't be using quarter grades. Now, if we were talking about, and I'll walk through an example much more quickly on the next one I look at, if you were looking at a quarter specific GPA, that would be different. Then you would only have that particular quarter here on this term. And I'll show you an example of that. Grade levels. So again, this is a cumulative GPA we're looking at, a cumulative GPA calculation. And something to consider is which grade levels should be, which courses of which grade level should be considered. And so when a student was in 7th grade, is it possible a 7th grader that, or a high school student you have, when he or she were in 7th grade, may have had a semester or year-long grade that would calculate into their cumulative GPA? Think of younger students who take algebra or another math class, another advanced math, or maybe you have students in the middle school that complete their PE or health, or maybe fine art credit in their 8th grade year, 7th or 8th grade year, for high school credit. And if you want those to calculate into their high school cumulative GPA, you have to account for that in the grade levels, because once you start calling out any grade levels here, it's only going to pull their grades from that specific grade level. So on every stored grade is a student's grade level in which they took that course or completed that course or earned that stored grade, I will say. So that's important to take into consideration. On the further end, if you will, consider students who stay a year or two after high school. Maybe our special education students or option 23, students, or the students who didn't make their graduation requirements by the end of their senior year, and are categorized as a 13. So you would want those grade levels to also be considered in their final GPA, or not, depending on your board policy on that, on GPA calculation and all of that. So school years. School years aren't used a whole lot, but I'm going to give you an example of a school year, an example of a cumulative GPA that would use a school year. So you would use a school year in the case of maybe where you have an eligibility GPA. So your students came back to school in August, and a lot of them are playing sports, involved in athletics. And you want to determine who's eligible during quarter one based upon last year's Q4 GPA. So I do want to show you an example of that after this. In that case, in that very specific example, you would want a school year because you don't want the GPA looking at this year's Q4. You'd want it looking at last year's Q4 grade, stored grade, that is. So, and remember, anytime that we're talking stored grades, it is called a cumulative calculation type. So sort of a misleading term to some, because just think cumulative equals stored grades, not necessarily over time through multiple years. Could be, but it doesn't have to be. Right. Some have a GPA that's specific to credit type. If you wanted a certain subject area GPA, you could do that. I don't see that but I'm sure it's been used. And then down here, what type of stored grades would you like to include? So all of our stored grades have these parameters set, either checked or not, and you're setting here within the GPA which grades count for this particular calculation. The ones with potential credit, the ones that count in GPA.
Stephen, we have a question from Denise in the chat. Just
What's the
going
question?
back to the school years. She
Yep.
asked, should this be filled in or blank on a normal weighted or unweighted GPA calculation?
That's a great question. It should be left blank in almost all cases, unless you are asking it to look specifically back at a specific year in time. So like in the case of eligibility, which would change year to year, right? So in fact, I'm going to pop over to an eligibility GPA because we do have one of those set up here. I'm going to go into the, oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was going to say, Stephen, what the year and the terms, and some of those, it gets a little bit tricky, but if you do not have the year, it's going to use your current year. If you're going to go back in time or specify, then you need that. I would, if you go to the help on this screen, it actually is a very good explanation of
I think it's on the
system help, and then scroll on down. It should say, mine went to GPA. Yeah, click on GPA calculations there.
There we go.
And then scroll down a little bit. There are some weird combinations that will come up from time to time, but this will explain that. It does a good job. So it's one or more 4-digit school years, and only grades during the specified year will be used. But if it's blank, it's using the current year.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So in my example here, again, I'm talking about my eligibility for Q1, right, is looking back at their grades in Q4, cumulative because they're stored, and in the 24-25 school year. And now next year, when I use the same calculation, I would, of course, have to come back here and plug in a 25 because, again, next school year, I'm looking back at the prior school year. Not to confuse the point, but that is the rare case where you'd want to change the year here on the calculation. I've seen this throw some of our district leaders and school counselors and administrators off a little bit because I've seen the current calculation method with a, let's see, I think we have high school current, and I've seen a year plugged in here. And if you put a year in there and then it becomes a year later, it's looking at it, it wants to use last year's. So it's gonna throw you a little bit. So I've seen that before, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. So if you're talking about current, and in this particular situation using current term, you don't need a school year in there because it's just going to look at the current year, which is what you want based upon the name alone, not looking at a past year, of course. Any questions about GPA calculations?
Nothing in the chat.
Great. Well, I do want to pop over to the building now for our second half. And I want to talk about places around PowerSchool that GPA is utilized. And where I want to start, and this is again in the agenda here, where I want to start is on a group of students. I tend to use the same group of fake data students in my train environment here. So I'm going to go ahead and select my advisory group here. I just went to stored selections, and I have these kids saved from for these different power hours that we do. And so I'm going to start with my student Khaki here. And Khaki, let's see, we're going to go to their quick lookup screen. Now, as you all know, once I'm in a student within the students here, I have a different set of screens, student screens, and I'm looking in student profile. And where I want to begin with this is the quick lookup. And if you didn't notice, again, I did pop over to the building now. I could access these screens from the district office, but I'm choosing to access them from the high school for a couple of reasons. There's some things that will look different that I'm about to do if you're at the district office level. So I want to be in the building for this part, looking at students. So I'm going to go to quick lookup. And here, again, in training environments, I don't have grades in for this particular student. So therefore, this student doesn't have current Q1 grades, but they would if this were an actual environment where teachers were putting in grades and it's October and we're about to close down for the end of Q1, they would have grades here. But I do want to point out, again, this particular power hours focuses on GPA. So we're going to pop down here, and I want to point something out here. And that is that the GPA that I've chosen to use, actually I should just highlight the actual name, is the same one that I was looking at in our GPA calculations at the district office level. So this is the one I've chosen as the district leader, or whomever makes that decision in your school building or your district, to display here on the quick lookup screen. This is another place that you may get questions from parents and students or teachers via the parent, right, at conferences or something, to know which GPA is pulling here. And it's a very valid question. So I know that we're pulling the high school cumulative GPA here, and that this student's high school cumulative GPA is currently a 2.264. Now that's probably going to be different, or it's certainly going to be different from their current Q1 GPA. But this does throw people because the word current is going to be displayed here. That's PowerSchool default. And then this term here is just telling you what term is the current term set for the building. All right. So this does not mean that the student has a 2.264 for their Q1 grades only. It truly is their cumulative GPA, because that's what's set here. So I wanted to point that out. I took a case on that recently, and it made me realize that that can be confusing for a lot of users, right? It's saying Q1. That's the current term. So you always have a current term set at your building level, and our current term is set to Q1 because we're in Q1. Also, the word current is a little off-putting in this particular context. So I do want to show you where this is set up. So I can change this to be the current Q1 GPA if I want. So when kids go to their grades and attendance screen in the public portal, which is equivalent to the quick lookup in our admin portal, same thing. So when I, as a parent, or my student that's in school right now, goes to their public portal account and looks at this page, which GPA do I want to show them? And the way you would change that is going to be under the school management, academics, GPA for info for student screens. Right up here, up top, for the quick lookup, which GPA do you want to display under their schedule on the quick lookup screen? So it makes it very clear from this screen what we're talking about. And I could change that. If I want them to see their current GPA, which again, my current GPA is set to pull from the gradebook, because in my GPA calculations set up at the district level, I say that high school current looks at the current term in the gradebook. And so I could change that. And I'm going to bet that when I go back to that student's quick lookup, there's going to be a value of blank because she doesn't have any grades in the gradebook, presumably. And that is correct. So again, in this environment, these students do not have grades in the gradebook, therefore she has no value here. So if you're seeing something like that in your district, in your building, I should say, that would be why. Maybe there's, you know, if it was August, for example, there's no grades in the grade book, or if you're seeing this right now, maybe there's something in your GPA calculation that's that needs corrected. All right, and so after this, we were talking about this as a team prior to this call. If you are seeing maybe some things in your building or district that need to be, you know, you need troubleshooting done, then we would encourage you to, if you are unable to work that out, so first go to your district leader. That's what we always recommend, to problem solve, and your district leader can put in a case with the meta team to help understand your GPAs if you're unsure of any of the things that we're talking about here. But again, I also want to echo what we said earlier, and if anybody has any questions in the moment, you're welcome to ask right now. All right. So one student screen I wanted to show you, quick look up, and which is shown here. I will reference that screen again, that GPA for student screens again. In fact, I'll go do that right now. So another place in see, academics that pertains to that last screen I showed you, that GPA info for student screens, is their cumulative info screen. Cumulative info is also a student screen that's visible in the public portal. So another place you really want to make sure this information is accurate. We take at least a few tickets every year, usually at the beginning of the year, asking why parents are seeing the wrong information. And your GPA calculation may be set up wrong, or that case that we talked about earlier where it's looking at the prior year. So our GPAs are set up here in this building. Current GPA, again, she doesn't have any grades, and she doesn't have any grades in any of the quarters currently. So when we refresh the data in our train environment, probably next month, we will see some different results here. This student, you know, it'll pull in some grades for her when we refresh this train database, and she would have a current GPA as well as a Q1, you know, cumulative GPA most likely from her stored grades. So that's why we're not seeing anything up here. Her cumulative GPA is showing, her cumulative unweighted. They do use class rank, which I'll touch on briefly in this hour as well. They use class rank in this building, and class rank is utilizing a GPA calculation to determine that. And then a couple other what we call DAT codes, what PowerSchool calls data access tag, or DAT codes, are being utilized to show the number of credits the student has earned. And they just want a little bit extra here, and they're showing it by year as well. So some other information here as well. Like I said, we're not going to dig into class rank much or credit. So, but just popping back over to our prior screen. So again, school management, and this is on your agenda, by the way. So I know I'm moving quick here, but you can see which GPA calculation from our district office level is being utilized to display on the screen. The cumulative versus the cumulative unweighted, which if you remember, wasn't counting those courses with added value. If this student didn't take anything with added value in her freshman year, then these two are going to be the same. That's why they are the same. All right. Class rank is utilizing the cumulative GPA, so on and so forth. Again, I'm not going to go into this down here. All right. I'm going to flip this back to cumulative again. All right. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, again, very briefly, class rank methods. So I'm going to go back to school management. I am going to go to academics, class rank methods. And I just wanted to point out that if you're a high school, which I think most of you represent a high school on this call, if not all of you, and you are using class rank, some of our buildings aren't using class rank anymore. Each class rank method is also tied to a GPA. Now, in this particular school, they chose to use high school cumulative and call it the weighted ranking method. So again, this is just going back to what I said at the beginning, that you want to be aware, and that's why I kind of built out the agenda the way I did, of all the places in your building that's utilizing GPA. So if you know, choose to change the GPA calculation or rename it, just be aware that some of the things that you have set up won't work anymore. So I just wanted to point out the class rank methods are all tied to a particular GPA calculation method. And you can have multiple class rank methods. And then when you run that class rank, so whomever does that in your building, whether it's manually or you have it set to be automated, every time it's run, manually or automated, it is utilizing a class rank method, or I'm sorry, a GPA calculation method. Any questions on that? Kind of buzzed through that one real quick, but I didn't plan on really delving into class rank methods on this call.
Not seeing anything in the chat.
All right, then we're moving on. Another kind of similar idea here in the way that GPA calculations impact grade data is honor roll methods. Similar idea here that every honor roll method it has to be tied to a GPA calculation. And there is a method, and within each honor roll method, there are levels. I'll put in a quick plug here. I'm not going to go into details here because in 2 weeks from today, we do have an honor roll specific power hour. So we'll do an hour, probably less to be honest, on honor roll setup and honor roll calculation. And so I'm just going to click in here and show you though, again, just to demonstrate another place that GPA calculations are important. So on every level of a honor roll is going to be a GPA calculation method. So again, another place that's used. So for Q1 GPA, whatever the level, obviously it's pulling from Q1 stored GPA that's set up at the district office level. And there's a lot of other things that go into that, but I just wanted to point that out. Questions on class rank or honor roll before we move on? So GPA may be impacting, the GPA calculations that you have set up may be impacting more than you were even aware of today. The next page I want to show you, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say no questions.
Okay. The next page I want to show you, I am going to go back to a student-specific screen here. And this time I want to show you what's technically a customization. And if you're not aware, I always kind of put this note out there in the case of some possible misunderstandings that are out there. But a customization is something that a person or a company, an organization designed to kind of add on to PowerSchool or make something work better or basically a tool that could be added on to PowerSchool somewhere. And the reason I say all that is because GPA validation is a customization that Meta did not create, but I find it useful. So it's out there and it probably is available to you in your own district. But I'm going to click on GPA validation and just show you because when I was in a building, I utilized this, and since I've been in a building, I've also utilized this quite a bit, and it's good for troubleshooting what if a student or a parent especially is concerned about their grade point average, which a lot of them are, rightfully so, and they're wondering how a grade point average is calculated, or maybe they're questioning how it's been calculated or if it's correct, you can utilize this page to, one, determine if it's being calculated correctly, and two, demonstrate how it's being calculated. So I'm going to go once again to the high school cumulative. That's the example we've been using a lot in this hour. And I'm going to just show you through an example. Pulled straight from the district office level, we have the name and the formula and the grade point average or GPA that the student has earned based upon exactly how this is set up. And of course, all the stored grades in their system in this case, stored because it's a cumulative, or I should have highlighted this, a cumulative calculation type. I love this page because it gives me a whole lot of information that I need. How many grades are being used in the calculation? How many years in the calculation? What is the total number of GPA points? I referenced this earlier, so a lot of schools go on a 4.0 scale, right? 4.0 for an A, 3.0 for a B, so on and so forth. This student has earned a total number of GPA points in their year of high school so far, 20.7. All right. It says the number of earned credits and the number of potential credits. And then equally important, which terms are being included in this calculation? The Y1, S1, S2. Again, we saw all this information at the district office level on the calculation itself. All of this are things that we went over already in this hour, but it lists that here so that I'll give this example again. If this student took an Algebra 1 class in 7th grade, but grade 7 wasn't represented for this GPA, that might be a reason their GPA is not calculating properly. And then my favorite part of this screen here is the difference between the grades they've earned that are included in the GPA versus the ones that they've earned that are excluded from the GPA. And so only her Y1, S1, or S2 classes, final grades, are being used. Only from grade 9. She must have not took anything with potential credit in grade 7 and 8. And down here, it will show you why grades were excluded from the calculation. Classes that took, or I'm sorry, grades that were stored at the quarter are excluded. Grades that have no potential credit are excluded. And anything that's marked to exclude from the GPA is excluded. So I highly recommend this for troubleshooting. And I also highly recommend that if you are going through this process, that you take a look at this ahead of time if your parent or student has questions to make sure that it's calculating properly before you get in that room and demonstrate this. So this has been, some of our school staff have found miscalculations based upon, maybe a year wasn't included, maybe a grade level, or maybe something was excluded that shouldn't have been, or something didn't have potential credit on it that should have. So good tool here. Any questions?
I am not seeing any questions, but yeah, this is a great tool to use especially when you're troubleshooting.
All right, using our same student here, I'm going to go to our transcript for this student. So you will find any high school student's transcript on the More menu down here, More Meta Reports. And the reason is that these are dynamic reports that were created by our team members, and can and will eventually be used for other types of reports. You can see in this train database, somebody had requested an immunization report to pull certain data, and someone else had requested some information pertaining to students' graduation. And so some of our districts, probably more than a couple, utilize this Ohio graduation worksheet that pulls different information out. But the most commonly used one is, of course, our student transcript. And once you go into your student transcript, as you probably all know, you can select certain parameters, and I'm just going to glaze right over that. That's not what's important for this one. I just wanted to point out that on the student's transcript, this is just one more place that the GPA calculation is very important, not only for giving a student their transcript throughout their high school years, but of course, toward the end of their high school career, when they need it for a job or college applications is the most obvious use of this. You want these calculations to be correct. And so again, their cumulative and unweighted cumulative are the same. And there's probably something a little off in this particular transcript setup. because it really shouldn't be pulling a specific to the grade level GPA here. So I would expect these to be blank right here. It would show this because she's been through 9th grade. She's currently at the beginning of her sophomore year. Therefore, these should be blank, and understandable why her cumulatives are showing as the 2.264. So again, just another place that that it's showing. Now, some of our districts are choosing not to display a GPA at all on their transcript, and that is an option. But most of them do. Most of our districts do. So this is completely customizable, as I think you all know. Questions on the transcript?
No questions.
Right. So I talked earlier in this hour about DAT codes, data access tags, which some of you are familiar with, some of you may not be as familiar with. And I want to point you to a great place for referencing DAT codes, how to find them, how to, how to make sure that you have the DAT code you need, or find out if a DAT code exists. So DAT code's just a quick definition. It's a code to pull certain data from PowerSchool, and it might be pulling data from different places. So it's not a static student field. It's not like a last name or phone number. So GPA, for example, GPA is looking at a GPA calculation from the district level, and then it's also looking at stored grades, as well as all the information within that GPA calculation that tells it what to look at within those stored grades. So it's a much more complicated point than pulling a simple static student field, something that's just set on a student. And the way you're going to find those DAT codes is a great reference point here, our PowerSchool DAT reference here. And so on here, I am going to type in, let's see, GPA. And so I just want to point this out that it is going to show you how to pull that code of GPA on a list of students, because where we're going next, where I kind of want to wrap this up, is showing you, you might want to make a list. So if you are a senior counselor, or you're supporting your counseling staff, or you're working on graduation with your seniors, you might want to pull a list of where they stand currently on their cumulative GPA, for example. And so this gives you an idea of what that's going to look like, as well as some of those other DAT codes that you saw today in this hour, credits, and number of credits and that sort of thing as well. So I happen to know in this example, they used the GPA called weighted, but I'm going to use that just as a copy paste sort of thing to come back here and show you two ways that you might make a list of students and their current grade point averages. So from your group actions menu, you can use under student reports, the custom student list or quick student export are fairly commonly used ways of pulling both static student fields, but also data access tag codes such as GPA. And so I will start off with my custom student list here. And fortunately for me, in this example, and because we are a little bit short on time, I told you we'd wrap up within an hour, that it saves the last one I've run. So I plugged all these in for a prior training. I was using this both yesterday and probably 2 weeks ago. And the GPA method I'm using is the high school cumulative unweighted. And I also wanted to run the cumulative, which again, in this particular building is the weighted one. So I'm using both on a custom student list, and I did give you examples right in the agenda, because this one's pretty hard to remember, especially even for me, that on a custom student list, you only need the asterisk and then the rest of the code. Whereas on the quick student export, it's going to look a little bit different, which I will show you an example of. So again, on the custom student list, just the asterisk and the code on both of these, and I'm going to submit. And along with the other information that I pulled out on here, I just want to point out that it pulled the both GPA calculations from this moment. So when I store grades next week in this building, these numbers are inevitably going to change because it's looking at the calculations that I've selected are looking at all stored grades. Actually, I take that back. They will not change because I'll be storing for Q1, and I'm looking at cumulative, which only looks at Y1, S1, and S2. But in January, once I store my S1 grades with potential and earned credit, these cumulative GPAs will change because any stored grades that fit in the parameters within that GPA calculation is going to impact said GPA. And then once I do store grades next week, jumping back a moment, for my Q1, then I can run a Q1 GPA if I wanted to. If I just wanted to see how my advisory students in this example are doing, I could run a Q1 GPA next week after I've stored the grades. Or I can currently run a current GPA if I had grades in the gradebook, which, as we know, I do not in this environment. So a couple different ways to utilize this report, looking at different student GPA calculations. And then where I want to wrap up is just one other report found on the same menu. Some of you are more akin to using the quick student export. Some of you prefer this, and that's okay. You just need this little caret here on this one. So this caret, parenthesis, end parenthesis here, and then we're going to pull high school cumulative. So all the information I want right now is my student's last first name, student number, and I want to pull that GPA method for their high school cumulative. So same idea here, except this time, instead of a custom student list, I'm pulling a quick student export, which is going to immediately give me a file. That's just the way my browser is set up. And now I have not as pretty as the custom student list, but I do have the same information here. So that's the cumulative GPA here was pulled for all of these students if I just needed a quick list, and then I can sort and I can filter as I want, as I need to from this list. You know, if I wanted to see who had the highest GPA out of my selection of students, who has the lowest, that sort of thing, I can do that.